travel's one way where you can rediscover yourself after the military, because that's, I think, the first thing every veteran needs to do is kind of recreate their post-military identity. And
someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone. You are not alone.
We have a remarkable guest joining us for this episode, John Davis. He's a former Army Infantry Squad Leader who served multiple combat tours with the 101st Airborne Division. He's earned a master's in education from Harvard, and now he spends his time writing and advocating for veterans. John, thank you for taking the time to come and talk with me on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
I'm really excited to be here. I followed you through Instagram for a while, so it's nice to jump on.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've kind of been doing the same now that we are traveling around the world. We see that you've been traveling quite extensively post-military, but before we get there, I'd love to learn a little bit more about what life was like growing up.
I grew up in good old Iowa, and kind of communal living outside all the time. I think people our age kind of took for granted the fact that we grew up outside, as opposed to now kids are growing up mainly indoors. So I grew up in Iowa playing sports, and that's why I think the military kind of made such a good fit for me, because I was used to the communal living, the teamwork, and things like that came with growing up in kind of small town Iowa. And then the military was, kind of a culture shock, because I grew up with cornfields in my backyard. And so just growing up playing sports, that was kind of my main thing.
Yeah, I remember growing up, a lot of the times we weren't allowed to come back in until the street lights turned on. Do you remember that at all?
And now parents have geo trackers on every single kid all the time. It's a totally different experience. And that's one of the reasons why there's less independence in the world.
So with all that independence that you ended up having, was there anything that kind of drove you towards joining the Army other than sports?
I originally wanted to join the military, the Marines, straight out of high school. And this was like at the height of Iraq and Afghanistan. And my mother, who had grown up in the Vietnam era, like a teenager during Vietnam, she at the time, even early on in the conflict, was like, this is a lot like Vietnam. Like, I'm not really sure what's going on over there. It seems a little confusing. And she had relatives in our family who went over and fought in Vietnam, or kind of like never the same when they came back or injured and all that. So I promised her I would try college. So I tried community college, and I was far more interested in alcohol and girls than anything to do with education. And then so I failed out of community college, ended up joining the Army anyway. So I just delayed it for like a year or two.
All right, so college didn't work out during that time, but the military seemed to do pretty well for you for a few years. Where'd your career end up taking you?
So I deployed to Afghanistan both times. Never got to go to Iraq. And I was stationed, like you mentioned, in the 101st. I really loved the military, and I loved what it did for me. And the reason why I ended up getting out of the military was, one, I had been injured a little bit in Afghanistan, some IEDs, and I was dealing with some physical issues, some TBI. And the secondary, the Army sent me to go be a recruiter in New York, which was not at all what I wanted to do. And so that was kind of a push for me to think about getting out of the military. So after I finished up recruiting, I ended up transitioning out and going to school.
How was that transition for you? I mean, I know some of the symptoms of TBI can linger, as well as, deciding school didn't work. Military was great. However, my career wasn't going where I wanted it to go. And now I'm going back to school with 18-year-old kids.
Yeah. Well, college is the first place that so many enlisted veterans kind of start on the journey. And I looked out because I started working for the VA through a work-study program for student veterans at my college. So I got the opportunity to work with student veterans kind of right out the bat. And in doing so, I kind of experienced and saw a lot of the issues that student veterans were facing. I was working with student veterans doing everything from, in processing them to the college, to certifying benefits and things like that. And that's what led to me writing my book, which is up here behind me, Combat to College, which is a guide for student veterans. Because as a student veteran and helping student veterans, I kind of had like an up-close look at the issues that student veterans were facing in the classroom. And then when I kind of got more into the educational aspect of things, you kind of start to realize, okay, people with college degrees make more money in life. People with college degrees struggle less with PTSD. People with college degrees are homeless less. People with college degrees kill themselves less. People with college degrees struggle with alcohol and dependency less, and things like that. So I kind of really got into the idea of viewing education as therapy for veterans, and especially since that's where so many veterans start out. And everyone knows momentum is extremely important in life. So that kind of first year of college is where I wanted to guide veterans. So, to kind of put on a trajectory for success. So my book helps veterans, make the most of their college experience, but also set themselves up for success. And like you mentioned, sitting in a classroom with a bunch of 18-year-old kids, for me, I felt like Adam Sandler and Billy Madison, where you're sitting there and everyone else is like, I was just like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. And it is a big shock that every veteran struggles.
Yeah, I had to learn pretty quickly. The school that I went to was very, very small, about 200 and some odd students. I was 30 years old when I went back. And I remember in one world studies class, an 18-year-old girl had mentioned something about getting her freedom back because an administration was taking over. And it triggered me in such a way that I didn't realize what my response was going to be. And I don't think it was anger, but it definitely came out that way. And my response was, what freedoms have you lost? Because my friends and I were dying in Iraq and Afghanistan to preserve these freedoms. And so if you feel like you've lost something over the years, tell me what it is. And I had to really learn about people's personal perspectives. Everything was relative to their life experience. And so as you were going through school and learning from all these different veterans, what were some of the resources that you felt were integral for these student veterans to have?
So the first thing to do is what my school was lucky, was we had a great veteran community. So we had a student veteran room at the school, and we kind of had all these events and things like that. But for student veterans to kind of stay on track throughout the college experience is a difficult thing to do, because a lot of the problems that student veterans face aren't necessarily wrapped up into education or PTSD. They're kind of wrapped up into that transition out of the military into college. Because student veterans tend to be older, you tend to have a family or a wife or divorce, and over 50% of student veterans have some kind of service-connected disability. And all those service-connected disabilities, of course, have an impact on education, whether they be PTSD or you can't hear or, you lost your legs or all those things. So you have to navigate and deal with all those obstacles in the classroom while you're pursuing your education. So that's why I felt like I had to write the book that I wrote. It originally started as John's College Tips, and I would give it to incoming student veterans. I said, here's John's College Tips, and there's 10 of them. And then eventually those tips morphed into chapters of a book, because they kept telling me like, man, you should, because I was running our student veteran program. And they kept saying, man, you should write a book. And I was like, I don't know the first thing about writing a book. And then it kind of just came, while working with veterans and going through my experiences and stuff like you were doing. Because if you're a student veteran, you can absolutely expect to be horrendously offended in a modern college classroom. And that's something, if you prepare for it, it's going to be a lot better, because I had a lot of experiences like that too, where you do want to, almost choke someone. I remember one of my first group projects that I did in school, one of the people in our group just was not doing the work that they were supposed to do, and our entire, grade and work depended on it. So I threatened to hurt the person. And the next day I'm at, which is what you do in the military. I'm like, hey, if you don't do this, you're going to have a bad day. And then, so, I'm in the security office at the school, for threatening other students. And I was like, I wasn't threatening them. I was just saying, and you have to learn how to deal with civilians and have civilian conversations, because a lot of people are very shocked, when you slip the F word casually into sentences in classes, which is perfectly acceptable in pretty much every environment in the military, but absolutely unacceptable in, college liberal arts class.
Yeah. I mean, I was going through your website and seeing some of your books that you do have out, and it seems like you've become such a great resource for not just student veterans, but veterans in general. Was writing always a passion for you, and what do you hope to accomplish through it?
I really liked reading. I grew up just, really enjoying reading. And then when I was in Afghanistan, I kind of fell back in love with reading, because the little cop I was at had all these books. So I just started, in all my free time, if I was at the gym, I would be reading. And then I found writing as one way to kind of express, my own therapy. Like when I write about my struggles with PTSD, me like drunk, after one of my friends killed themselves, calling the veteran crisis line, thinking about killing myself. When I go through those experiences, writing about them has really been a form of therapy for me. And that's one thing that a lot of veterans, I think, struggle to find, because I did for so long, is finding your own versions of therapy. Because the VA is only going to give you their version of therapy, but everyone's so different that your therapy has to be individualized as well.
That's incredible that you begin to use the writing as a therapy for yourself, and now you also pass on important lessons through your writing to others, helping them find their path. I know that a lot of your advocacy over the years has led you to different things, like speaking to different legislative bodies and advocating for veterans. Could you tell me a little bit about that work and what you did through there?
Yeah, so I did a fellowship for the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the Student Veterans of America to go talk to Congress. And what I wanted to do was legislate and help legislate for a path for greater student veteran employment. So I wanted student veterans to be able to get employed through their local VA and to be able to find part-time work that would kind of help them get through their school. Because like I mentioned, pretty much all student veterans have to work during their education, being the fact they're older and have responsibilities and, all these different things. So I wanted to do a program in which that I would help student veterans gain meaningful employment, either helping other veterans or in the veteran community, and get paid through the VA. And I got the opportunity to meet with Congress people and senators, and I worked on this legislative proposal for probably about 6 months. I had charts, graphs, research, kind of explaining all that, your financial health plays a lot into your mental health. And if you're constantly struggling with bills, if you're constantly worried about if you can make the payments on things, it's going to be hard for you to be successful in education. But if you can have a job that works with your school and paid through for the VA, then we see graduation rates go up. And when you see graduation rates go up, you see things like suicide come down. You see things like PTSD come down. You see homelessness come down. So I saw it kind of like as not necessarily cure all, but something that would greatly benefit the veteran community. And I could not get anyone in Congress to really care. I sat down with people and I pitched them my ideas. And of course, this was stuff that I worked on for a long time and was very passionate about. And I remember I got to meet with one congresswoman from my home state, and I was very excited to go meet with her because, she was from Iowa. And I kind of had everything laid out, about why I thought that she should sponsor this legislation. And I kind of get into my speech, and the woman is just not paying basically any attention to me, And then I talked for about 30, 45 seconds, and she's like, John, okay, I only have like another minute left, and I have to go. So if you can kind of wrap it up and then email it to me. And I had worked so hard to get to this point. At the time, I was a graduate student at Harvard. I was very passionate about helping veterans. And that kind of opened my eyes that, okay, I do want to work with veterans, but I can't really do it in this way, because then you have to operate within their system. And that was something that I just couldn't do. So I was kind of like, it made me back off. And that's when I realized, okay, I need to kind of find my own way. And that's what led me into writing and led me into writing my book and then starting a blog and write about different forms of therapy. So I have everything from like, hiking therapy, motorcycle therapy, tattoo therapy, because you have to find your own type of therapy. And I wanted to open kind of those doors up for veterans, that your therapy is in your hands and it's your job to kind of craft your own plan.
I love that message and the advocacy work that you've done. I mean, for yourself, it seems like education, advocacy work, or working with other veterans, and then traveling has kind of been the modalities that have worked for you post-service to this point during this season of life, to the point where you're now living abroad for nearly half a year, in addition to the work that you do. What made you decide to live abroad during this season of life?
Well, at the time, when I first came to the Dominican Republic almost 3 years ago, the United States was kind of in the height of the pandemic, and it was basically an insane time in of course, the United States of America. And one thing that kind of I thought about was it's hard to heal and be healthy in a very toxic environment. And with things like the political division, the arguing, everyone's waving signs everywhere, everyone has an opinion on everything. And veterans kind of live in solidarity during our years of service. And then we get out into a country that kind of feels artificially divided. And this has led a lot of veterans to live lives outside the United States. So here in the Dominican Republic, where I live, we have over 25,000 veterans that live here because, one, the cost of living is low. So if you're, retired from the military, you can survive and live well here on a military retirement. Whereas in the United States, not so much. You might have to pick up a second career. You might have to do these other things. Secondly, like I mentioned, you kind of connect with a lot of mental health. So for me, I get to swim in the ocean every day. I get to hike in the jungle. I get to watch a beer or drink a beer while the sun sets and things like that that's really been helpful for me. But also just the disconnection from the stress of the United States. And there's a thriving veteran community here. We have, veteran events. We have veteran healthcare through the Foreign Medical Program. So, if I want a mental health appointment, I can get one tomorrow. There's not any waiting list. Pretty much everything you can do through the VA at your home VA United States, you can do here in the Dominican Republic through these veteran centers. So people are kind of surprised to learn that, you don't lose your veteran benefits if you move abroad because those are your benefits. You earn that. And you can do a lot of your healthcare here. Now, there's some things that, you might not want to do here if you're getting some drastic surgery or something like that. But as far as physical therapy, I do aqua therapy every day, not every day, but once a week in the pool, I'll do aqua therapy and it really helps with my back. But another thing that helps me is just being in the sun, getting vitamin D, eating healthy and fresh food. In America, it's I could pull avocados off a tree. Whereas in America, everything's processed. It's all drive-through food. Here it's more natural. And a lot of veterans who, have had health issues really see a lot of those issues diminish once they start boosting your mental health, because of course, all those things are connected. So there's a lot of veterans that, really lives healthier and happier lives here in the Dominican Republic or abroad than they would in the United States.
That's been one of the things that I've noticed while we've been traveling, and I'm currently utilizing travel as a form of my therapy to get back out into the world, not being stuck in my own community, and also finding ways to discover, learn about, and give back to the communities that we're moving through. Because that's a big part, especially if you do decide to relocate to an area, is recognizing your contribution to that community is an economic impact in a positive way. So that when we do receive our health benefits, it's not just all about us. We can eat the healthy foods that are there. We can experience the outdoors, but we're also still serving and contributing our veteran community and the local community by shopping at their stores, buying the fresh produce, keeping the farmers employed, keeping that revenue going. And so I know that as I was going through my own transition of struggling on whether or not I should travel or just stay put where we were living in Hawaii, so that I can kind of expand my own personal growth. These were the thoughts that were going through my head. What has your experience been like interacting with these different cultures? You had mentioned earlier, you've lived in Thailand when you first got out, and then you've traveled in other areas. You were just here about a month before we were. How has travel been a form of your personal growth?
I think the military ruins travel for people. If you're on a C-130 or you're packed into a bus, it is not, you're told where to go, you're told what to bring. It kind of ruins it for people. So I found traveling to be one interesting form of therapy where I could really get awesome experiences, because you do have awesome experiences from the military and you do a lot of things, and travel is one way to kind of add to that. And all veterans are adventurous people. If we weren't adventurous people, we wouldn't have signed up to begin with. And travel is one way to kind of keep that adventure rolling. And in the military, we are more global citizens than your average, American who might not own a passport or have ever been out of the country. Because not only have we seen, our own hometowns, but we've bounced around the United States a little bit. I've been stationed in Georgia, Tennessee, New York, and then obviously overseas, seeing places like Qatar and Kyrgyzstan and Kuwait and Afghanistan. And getting those experiences in the military were really growing experiences. You come back with all those stories. And travel is one way to get more stories. And it, like you mentioned before, it can be difficult for veterans to do things like travel, because after bouncing around the military, sometimes we just want to stay still. Like, I just want to sit on my recliner, everybody, But when you travel, you can do things that that are exercise that don't feel like exercise. Like you mentioned hiking, how you love to hike. Well, the military ruins hiking for people because you're going to throw a ruck on your back at 3 a.m. and you're going to walk up a hill. People are going to yell at you, and it's going to be uncomfortable. But when you get out, you're hiking on the beach or in a mountain or something like that, it can really find a way to connect with nature, to connect with yourself. And sometimes to find yourself, you have to lose yourself, which is what I did for almost a year in Southeast Asia, hiking around and doing things. And, it was an experience that was difficult at times. I was really interested in the Vietnam War because I had so many family that had, experiences there. So getting to kind of see that up close and personal also gave me a sense of perspective, okay, I thought I had it bad in Afghanistan, what I went through. But then when I see what my uncle went through in Vietnam, it's okay, that was a million times worse. And in traveling, you also see things like extreme poverty that, I saw in Afghanistan. But when, I'm in Africa and you see that kind of poverty, on a different level, it really does give you a sense of gratitude. And I think that's important for everyone to have, but especially veterans, because we should be grateful for the opportunity to serve our country and opportunity to do the things we've done and to get our benefits when we get out. Travel's one way where you can rediscover yourself after the military, because that's, I think, the first thing every veteran needs to do is kind of recreate their post-military identity. And travel doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to go to Thailand. That's kind of extreme. But what you can do is go camping for a week. You can hit a weekend trip to a city or something like that. Just kind of get out there and continue to have experiences.
Absolutely. And, you have an extensive blog that talks about all these different modalities of treatment, different therapies, different life experiences that you've discovered over the years. On the topic of travel, are there any tips that you think you can potentially add to your blog and let people know that may be feeling apprehensive about getting out and traveling?
Yeah, I recently did an article about living abroad, which is a different story. And then I have an article about travel therapy, how to view travel as a form of therapy. As far as specific tips, sometimes you just have to do it. You have to jump in. When you join the military, you didn't really know exactly what you're getting into when you're raising your hand. It's kind of rolling the dice. And travel is kind of like that too. So I would say always start out small and then go bigger. So, I have a policy where I tell veterans, you should always have some type of vacation to look forward to. It doesn't necessarily matter what kind of vacation that is, but you always need something to look forward to. Be like, oh, in the summer, we're renting a cabin here for a week, and I'm taking my sons fishing. Something like that, always on the horizon. And so I would say to veterans, if you're worried about things like your PTSD, sometimes that's a way that keeps you in kind of your bubble and prevents you from growing, as opposed to experiencing new things and finding new challenges, because there's always going to be roadblocks traveling. Like you mentioned, going somewhere and your suitcase is not arriving. Well, if you're a veteran, that's kind of par for the course. So you're used to it anyway. You'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Those are some good tips to start small and then just roll with the experiences that you're going to be encountering. Now, in addition to writing about the traveling and the advocacy and education, this year you also released your latest book, #Freedom Challenge, 90 Days to Your Personal Best. And you collaborated with a former NFL athlete. Is that correct? Would you mind talking a little bit about what that book is, what that book covers?
Yeah, so I have it here. It's also behind me. It's a 90-day personal challenge split into 3 phases, of course, red, white, and blue. And the co-author and I wrote it. He medically retired from the NFL about the same time I medically retired from the Army. And we talked, extensively about how we missed kind of what those worlds provided. Because in the military and in the competitive athletic world, you're always pushing to be better. And you have kind of a structure around you with things like coaches, mentors, and every day you kind of want to be that kind of 1% better. So what we wanted to do is combine that kind of competitive spirit from the athletic world and the warrior mentality from the military into a book that would guide people through kind of a growth process based on our own experiences. So what we did is every week has a different workout submitted by a veteran and one submitted by an athlete. So we have, all these incredible people, all these wounded veterans, these high-performing veterans, these professional athletes, WWE stars, professional fighters, and things like that to really open people's eyes to the benefits of challenges. Because I think we tend to look at, things like being uncomfortable or discomforts as something to be avoided. But in reality, you need to embrace discomforts and look for challenges in order to find growth, because that's one way of therapy as well. Each phase has rules, reading recommendations, listening recommendations, podcast recommendations. Each phase has things like that to kind of guide people on a path of, personal growth.
I love that. And I encourage our listeners to pick up a copy of the #Freedom Challenge. It looks like there's some really great recommendations, some high performers. I was definitely turned on to some of the WWE stars that I'm still discovering. I was thoroughly impressed with the guest content that you have in there.
Yeah, at every copy, we're donated money to a veteran suicide organization. So it's, we're working to give back, just continuing to do it. And so we've really had a lot of good responses for people who are experiencing growth from it.
Yeah, we actually discovered that organization. Could you just give a shout out to the organization that you guys donate money to through the sales?
Yeah, it's on my website, but it's a Suicide Awareness and Relief Fund. So what they do, what I like about them is it's kind of an on-the-ground organization where they have specific goals. Like they want to get September 22nd recognized as a national holiday for the veterans who have taken their lives, through suicide. And they work to, work with individual veterans who are struggling, but then also kind of on the broader level. So they're, a small nonprofit up in New York. And if you're looking to donate or looking to buy a T-shirt or anything, please go check them out. It's they're doing so much with veteran mental health and suicide that we really wanted to give. So money from each copy bought goes to them.
Awesome. That's a great cause to give to. I have a few last questions for you. Our podcast is founded on 5 pillars of health, adopted from a whole health model to include physical, mental, spiritual, relational, and occupational. And I would just love to run you through some rapid fire questions if you're game.
Okay.
All right. So what do you do to take care of your body and physical well-being?
I read for an hour a day and I work out for an hour a day every day.
What type of workout are we talking about?
Different things. This afternoon, I volunteer with a youth boxing program here in the Dominican Republic. So I go there and work out with some of the kids who they love to be yelled at and told to do push-ups and things like that, kind of the Army stuff.
Excellent. How do you maintain a positive mindset and take care of your mental health?
Well, I find it easier to do here in the Dominican Republic. So like I mentioned earlier, this evening, I will watch the sunset and drink a beer. So you have to actively do things to take care of yourself. It's not something that you can be passive about. You have to be a real active participant in your own mental health, as opposed to just thinking you're going to swallow a pill and it's going to do the work, which is something I did for years and it did not help me.
That's a great point. Be active in your own recovery. I know that you are currently traveling solo, and that's been your modus operandi for a while. But who are you currently closest with, and how do you keep that relationship healthy?
I have a group of retired veterans and some cops, and we go out to dinner twice a week. So, which is always a good time. We'll go out to dinner, have a great meal, talk for a few hours. We went to dinner the other night for 4 hours, just talking and drinking and having dessert and, enjoying it. So I think that building community is one way that what veterans have to do after service, because we're really provided with a community in the military. Your friends are kind of issued to you. And then we get out, that all kind of slips away. So you have to create something akin to that, even on the civilian side. So for me, I think staying close to veterans as well as people I serve with is important.
Awesome. having a strong professional health, whether that's choosing the right job or the right work environment, what does a perfect work day look like for you?
Well, I'm lucky to do most of my work from the computer. So it's a little different than most people. So like, today I woke up, I swam in the ocean, and then I'm working on a veteran seminar explaining post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. So I'm doing a presentation on exactly how you access your benefits and then the kind of different ways to go about it. So I'm working on a presentation for that. And then I'm working here with you right now. And this afternoon I'll be, volunteering at the local boxing program. So something like that is a good day for me. But I'm only able to do that because I live in the Dominican Republic and my rent is $450 a month. And, so it's kind of a different situation than a lot of veterans to deal with.
Absolutely. But reducing that stress, focusing on the things that you want to be doing is really critical. And then surrounding yourself with those that you want to be working with.
Yeah. Wealth comes from your mental health. It comes from your relationships. It doesn't always come from money. I mean, you learn that in the military because I was very happy as like a 19, 20-year-old private, I barely had enough money to cover my monthly alcohol expenses, but I was still having a good time. So, you have to do other things, and not be so stressed about the bank account every month.
Absolutely. How would you define your purpose during this season of life?
I think right now it's how many veterans I can kind of reach with my living abroad message, because, the veterans that I see here living in the Dominican Republic are really kind of living very high quality, kind of like, I hate to say like your best life, but, when you're in an environment like this, it's kind of easier to do. So right now I'm trying to put out a message to my fellow veterans, especially those struggling with PTSD here in the United States or with their own mental health. Hey, maybe a higher quality and more satisfying life might be outside of the United States. And there are a lot of different options, regarding getting your health care and things like that. There's giant VA in the Philippines if you want to live in the Philippines, which is, quite a ways. But there are options for veterans outside the United States and away from the VA when it goes to pursuing your own mental health and happiness.
It's a great purpose. And finally, what would you say to someone who's currently struggling?
Well, I'd say there's no generic bland advice that you can give for someone, who's struggling. I think that a lot of times you have to listen to that person and kind of hear what they're going through. But kind of going with what I said earlier, you have to be the director of your own therapy. A lot of us are putting too much faith into things like the VA. I mean, I went to the VA for years, and they kind of just gave me a bunch of pills out of a vending machine. This to sleep, this to relax, this when you feel anxiety. And I didn't find that particularly helpful after a while. So you have to kind of realize that the buck stops with you. In the military, responsibility is shared. It's shared within the unit. It's shared within the team. It's shared within the platoon or your squad or whatever. But on the outside world, responsibility is very individual. And I think veterans kind of struggle with that transition from the shared responsibility to the individual responsibility when you're used to having all of these structures of support around you. I remember even in the Army, like I got an emergency loan because I ran out of money one month, and things like that don't exist in the civilian world the same way they do in the military. So you kind of have to really put effort into crafting your own specific health plan and not relying on a doctor or anyone to do it, because you're going to be the one that's going to have to live with yourself at the end. So I would say get out there and really craft your own individual health plan as opposed to letting someone design one for you.
Absolutely. And that's the whole idea of a whole health model, is that you become partnered in your own care, choosing the path that's going to be best for you and identifying where those resources are going to be best available for you. John, thank you so much for sharing your journey here on the 1 Mile 1 Veteran podcast, and also finding your modality, living abroad right now, and whether it's in the Dominican Republic, Africa later this year, or somewhere else in the world. I hope that we do encounter our paths along this travel road. But before I let you go, how can other people end up finding you and locating your work?
So I started putting a lot of living abroad content on Instagram. Kind of felt like that was the best way to get the message out there. I have my website, johnhdaviswriter.com. And then the books behind me, are all for sale on Amazon as well as through my website. So my Combat to College book, that's a guide for student veterans, the Freedom Challenge, 90-day personal challenge. And then the other book I have is a student veteran semester journal. And what that is it takes veterans through a 16-week semester, week by week, with guides, planning, tips, advice, kind of designed for a first-time college student that's a veteran through the veteran lens and experience. So you can find me on Instagram. That's where I post a lot of things I do, a lot of articles, podcasts, and all that.
Excellent. We'll make sure that we include those links for our listeners to find on our website. John, again, thank you so much for joining us on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Awesome to be here. Thanks.